and it hits me, oh my gosh, this is that triangle.
You know, there's explanation for everything that occurred in the Rendlesham Forest incident that doesn't involve aliens at all.
It was completely silent. It comes right over our heads.
He saw a classic flying saucer really standing in the clearing.
He turned over to my father and held his hand, and he looked in his eyes and he said, "We're not alone."
This is Martin Willis. Welcome to Podcast UFO, and I'm live streaming on YouTube all the way from Russia. And my guest today is going to be Stanton Friedman, and we're going to be talking about, the UFO documents on Midnight in the Desert. I want to get his take on that. Also, Alejandro Rojas is coming up here in just a minute. We're going to be talking about, he was at Roswell last week, and so was Stan Friedman. So Stan and I will be talking about that. I'm sure Alejandro will be discussing that as well. If you support the show, I want to thank you very much. And it's pretty easy to do at a couple dollars or more per month. I was checking today. Boy, we get a lot of downloads on our free show, which is great. I finally got it so I can see statistically how many are being downloaded. So if you want to spend a couple dollars or a month or more, you can do that on podcastufo.com. If you can't do that but you still want to listen to the whole show, all you got to do is tune in live on YouTube or on podcastufo.com. And also, the time is 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you want to get on a mailing list on the sidebar on podcastufo.com, there is a little email sign up. You just pop your email address in there and you'll get a notice for when the shows are coming up once a week, and it'll also state the time and all that. And when the Everything Else show starts again, that notice will be included in that as well. I think that's enough talking for me. Alejandro, how are you?
I am well, my friend.
Yes, and you've been you were in Roswell, and you've been busy.
That is right, my friend. Yes, I was in Roswell for the 70th anniversary shindig. Of course, I've been out there for the last during the event 20 years, or no, not that long, 10 years or so. But yeah, this was a lot of fun. This was bigger than previously, although it's continuing to do really well. And this being the 70th, a lot more people had shown up. So we had like a lot of people from Arizona. In fact, Arizona MUFON had a float in the parade. So that was a lot of fun. And the parade actually was a lot bigger. There were several floats. So KGRA, Race Hobbs, runs that. Yeah. Uh-huh. The station that has a bunch of podcasts. They had a float, and they were also sponsoring and helping organize the Daily Roswell Records event. And the Daily Roswell Record also had its own float. So this is fun. I got to be on that float with Nick Pope, Chase Kletsky, or no, I'm sorry, not Nick. It was Richard Dolan. Nick was there speaking. He wasn't on the float. But Richard Dolan, his fiancée Tracy, Chase Kletsky, myself, David Marler, and his girlfriend and her girls, and then Josh Gates. So from the TV show, Expedition Unknown?
Oh, okay.
He was on our float too. So that was kind of a lot of fun. I posted some pictures of that. So yeah, that was a good time. And as far as the talks, lots of great, interesting stuff. No groundbreaking or even new piece of information, I don't think, was relayed. Mostly people at our event for the newspaper were talking about Roswell itself, which was kind of a challenge for some of us because we're not experts on Roswell. But of course, we are familiar with Roswell, so we talked about that. I talked about some potential evidence that, some things that need to be analyzed, that hopefully I'm a project of that will get those things analyzed, but also some of the recent new news that discussed Roswell, such as the document that you're going to be talking to Stanton Friedman about, and also another alleged witness who has come forth, and that was in Irena Scott's book. So I interviewed her not too long ago, but she's got a new book out called UFOs, 70 Years of Lies, Misinformation, and Government Cover-Ups. She is a PhD, actually, and she's been in ufology for decades. as in MUFON and stuff like that. So this book is kind of all about her research, including, the testimony of some guy who says he was part of, or had seen some stuff. So I can go over the details in that story too, if you like.
Yeah. Well, let's hear about that.
Okay, so this is interesting. This guy says he was a police officer, a deputy sheriff, in fact, in Big Springs, Texas. And he, in the 40s, says they were going to pick up a witness in Roswell. He was riding with his sheriff. Well, along the way, they said they saw some commotion near Roswell off the side of the road, so they parked and right off the road. So they said they were within 12 feet of these gurneys with bodies on them that the wind blew, and he could see under the gurneys, and there were aliens under there. He said they're like 5 feet tall, big heads, big eyes, like we know. And then off in the distance, they had like a crane that was picking up some large 100-foot in diameter circular object that seemed to have crashed in the desert there, and they were collecting all of this. So they looked at it for a while. The military guys told them they couldn't get any closer, and eventually they left and went and picked up their prisoner. So that's his story. There are a couple issues.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you about an issue that I was thinking. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, what's yours?
Mine is when you have an object that's 100 feet across, first of all, there's no other mention of anything like that. There's this small, like, Volkswagen-sized thing mentioned at the second site or whatever. You heard that a number of times. And you only hear scattered debris on the first site. And then secondly, how on earth would you transport a 100, circular 100-foot object anywhere? That just can't be done, or it can't be done easily or, covertly in any type of way.
Yeah, so those are all great points. Yeah, there's a lot of obvious, I think, glaring issues. Also, none of the crash sites were right off the road where people could see them. The military, he says, because the witness, you can see the testimony, he says the military didn't bother him, didn't tell him, hey, don't tell anybody about this, or get out of here, or anything like that. So, which is kind of funny. They just, let them look, and they had these bodies, 10 feet away from the road where these guys came and parked. So that doesn't fit the location. There's also another problem. So Chase Kletsky was part of this, where Irina and Philip Mantle, who published the book and also wrote the story that you can read about this on Open Minds, went to MUFON and said, hey, what do you guys think? Can you help us do some research? Well, some of the MUFON guys did some research, and they found that the guy that he says was sheriff that he went with was sheriff in the 30s. Then he lost his sheriff duties. Someone else was elected. And then he regained, ran for sheriff again and regained that position in the 50s. But in the 40s, this guy wasn't sheriff. So they suspect perhaps this guy is not necessarily lying, but he saw something else. Maybe he saw something else that had crashed in the 50s when he and the sheriff were driving near Roswell. So, yeah, so there's a lot of problems with this gentleman's testimony.
Yeah.
But it's something that else has kind of made some news because, of course, UK tabloids have picked up on the story.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, of course they have.
Mm-hmm.
and roll with it. Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, that is interesting. Yeah, I don't know. It doesn't sound really that good, and it's too bad. And I was wondering, I was going to talk to Stan about this. If there's a lot of people that have shown up over the years at the festival that were purported witnesses. Do you happen to know that?
I do, because almost every year, there's some hub and some secrecy. Did you hear about this guy? Or, I talked to this guy or that guy. And so that sort of thing does happen. In fact, I heard of someone that supposedly was talking to people at this event as well. So I'm not sure of any of the details, and a lot of times these things don't pan out, but sometimes they do. So we'll see. And sometimes these people go to Stanton, so that'll be a great question to ask him as well. Um, he's probably aware of this story too, so it'd be interesting to see what he thinks of it. And of course, the other thing I spoke about is this document that you're going to talk to Stan about, which many of us feel there are many problems with. So it'll be interesting to hear what Stan has to say.
Yes, it will. I don't know. I know at first he thought it was pretty good, but I think he may have changed his mind. But actually, I have absolutely no idea what his stand is, so I'm taking him on with that open question. We'll see what he says.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have a funny Stan story too. I don't think I've shared this with you before or on your show. So at the museum, and I was able to go visit Stan, and he's always with Kathleen Martin, someone he's written books with recently, and she's also helping him because he's getting up there and he needs some help. So both great people.
Mm-hmm.
But one year, and this is about a couple years ago, when you go into the museum, on the right, in between the stands, is where all the speakers are. And Kathleen and Stan are always first. They're in that first spot.
Right.
And one year Stan was sick and he couldn't make it out there. And so just to make it feel like he was there, Kathleen put a picture of him near the seat where he would usually sit. And she was selling the books. But it was just hilarious because people would walk up, and you got that impression, although I knew better when I first saw it. You walk up and you see Kathleen and this picture of Stan. Everybody thought he had passed away. And people were really freaking out. And, their first reaction is, oh my gosh, what happened? This is so sad. And Kathleen's like, no. She had to explain a lot that year. No, he's fine.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So anything else going on?
That's about it. I mean, there is some other stuff out there. I just got back, from Roswell, and then yesterday was the 4th, so doing some celebration and stuff. So I did update the site yesterday, and while I was gone. So you have daily news headlines from all of this week, and there are some interesting headlines out there, such as now that the UK UFO files. People are taking a look at them and writing some stories about those. So there are a couple interesting stories, like this crew from a Cold War spy plane in the UK that saw some object that was covered with 20 flashing lights. So that's really interesting. So that's a good story out there. But yeah, so there's some interesting headlines. There is a sighting report from Roger Marsh from South Dakota about a disc object that a witness says looked like it broke into two pieces or two different objects and flew away. So that's kind of interesting too, but you can see it all at openminds.tv.
Great. All right, Alejandro. Hey, thanks so much.
Yep, thank you.
All right, and we'll talk to you next week.
All righty.
And thanks again for doing the show live.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right. Okay, hang in there, everyone.
Hello.
Hi, Stan. How are you? Welcome back to the show.
I'm glad to be on again.
Yes, and you've been doing a lot of traveling, right?
Quite a bit. Yeah, I just got back from an incredibly successful Roswell festival, annual festival, 70th anniversary of the Roswell incident, and best crowd. I mean, 70% over last year for the weekend.
Whoa.
Well over 7,000 people.
Wow. Can they accommodate all those people comfortably there in that town?
Well, yeah, they built a few new motels, and they weren't all there at once. It's over a 4-day period, but still, yeah, it's festival time. They close off some of the streets, and yeah, it's a ball.
Is a lot of it kind of fringy, or is there some?
No,
that's good to hear.
There isn't any fringy stuff. Good speakers, solid stuff. I saw 2 tinfoil hats once.
They probably did that as a joke, I'm sure. Yeah.
So the tone is certainly not. They've got a new director at the museum, and he's done a great job in updating the place and keeping things running on time and all that sort of stuff. That was a pleasure. I mean, I have to take 3 flights to get there, so it's a long day each way.
Oh yeah. That's Oh, is it? Oh my God! So you have to fly 3 different. You have to have 2 different layovers, basically. And
yeah, I fly from here to Montreal, and Montreal to Dallas, and Dallas to Roswell.
Oh boy, yeah. Well,
and in reverse.
Yeah, I really wanted to make it out there. I told you earlier, just when we chatted for a second, I'm over in Russia, but the 70th would have been a great one to go to. But I'll get out there one of these years. It should be a lot of fun catching up, with a lot of friends, and I just have never even been there, to the town. And I lived in New Mexico at one time. And
oh, you did?
Yeah, lived in Los Alamos. Yeah.
Oh, there's a special place. I like Los Alamos.
Well, only yes, Bandelier and all the beautiful parks around there. My sister and brother-in-law, he worked at the labs, and I lived there for about 4 or 5 months. So yeah, it's a beautiful area, very nice.
If you can stand the altitude now, it's pretty nice.
It really takes you a couple of weeks to get used to that. From what I remember.
Yeah.
So Stan, we had you on. I think it was about 4 or 5 months ago, something like that. I always love to have you on, and I think you always have a really good message. And one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was, of course, Roswell. We can get more into that, but after that, I want to talk to you a little bit about the document that was, came out of Heather Wade's Midnight in the Desert. I know you had talked about that. But first, I want to ask you a little bit more about Roswell. What did you think about the alleged witness? Alejandro and I we sort of poked a couple of holes in some of the things that he said, the new witness that supposedly came forward. And
what new witness is that? Wait a minute.
Okay. This is the one that said he accompanied the police officer and saw the crash on the side of the road. So if you hadn't heard about it, I thought it was something that might have been circulating this last at the event.
I've been tied up. I was even offline when I was down in Roswell. I was busy all day long, and so no, I haven't. Now, people better understand. My whole goal is to have facts in hand before putting mouth in gear.
Sure,
so I don't like to express opinions without having data. I did find some data on the new MJ-12 document, but and I barely had time to do that.
But
digging out facts is not as easy as it sounds. And I see a lot of people in the field who accept claims as if they were evidence, but claims aren't evidence. You need data. You need something solid to base the claims on, not just because, it sounds like a great story. A lot of great stories out there. It doesn't make them true. And people have been writing science fiction for a long time.
Yeah. And a lot of times Alejandro and I have brought up, and I did with the guests last week, was the fact that the British tabloids seem to just run with about anything that pops up, and I think what happens, and a lot of what happens these days is, the myths do become reality to a lot of people, because it's only, the surface. They're only, like if you're a person, let's just say a person on the outside, we'll put it that way, someone that doesn't really pay attention to UFOs, and you see a story, you're going to read the story and see it in the news and think, hey, that might, that must be real, or you know what I mean? It's kind of a shame.
Yeah, they wouldn't have published that if it wasn't true, would they? Of course they would if they felt like.
Yeah. So there's a lot of that going on, but it's really hard these days because of that. It just seems like I want to say it's becoming more and more watered down,
Well, sure, many people have finally recognized that, gee, there's a lot of interest in UFOs. What's wrong with this story? What the hell? And that's not good enough. It appeals to people maybe, but to some people. But they believe what they want to believe, I suppose. And if it sounds like it's coming from an authoritative source, then let's go with it, of course. What can I say? I'm a scientist, not a science fiction writer.
Yes, Stan, I'll just let you know, we do have questions that do come in to the chat room. We also have a couple of people that have posted some questions up on the forum, which I will get to when I can. Someone wanted to know about, and I'm not familiar, talk about facts in hand. I don't have the facts in hand here, although I had them on my show recently. But someone wants to know what you think about Kevin Randle's change in position over the years regarding Roswell.
Well, I'm not satisfied that it's legitimate. I mean, he has the right to take any position he feels like, but I shocked somebody a bit the other day by pointing out that Kevin, we've known each other for, 20 or more years, I suppose, but and we've disagreed for a good deal of that time. People forget, Kevin is a very effective writer of fiction. He's written more than 80 books, which is, I'm mostly under other names, now not under his own name. And so his standards is what sounds good, not what is true. All fiction writers, I read a lot of fiction. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with writing fiction, but it's not the same as nonfiction. And there are times when Kevin surprises me. For example, he complained in his first objection to MJ-12 that it says Admiral Roscoe Hillenkoetter, well, he was only a rear admiral. He would never have called himself admiral. And the fact of the matter is that all the military officers on MJ-12, the generic ranks were used for. It's standard practice. General Goodpaster was Ike's staff secretary. He was a brigadier general. Knew Ike very well. And so when they had meetings at the White House, he would write minutes and comments and so forth. The president doesn't write summaries of meetings. And writing comments, I just lost where I was going with that. Anyway, he would list attendees at meetings, including General Goodpaster. He'd sign it Brigadier General Goodpaster. I called two different archivists, and they said it's standard practice. And one pointed out, and I checked, and he was right, that Ike used generic ranks. And, I have meetings where there were 5 different people given generic ranks. By that I mean general or admiral, as opposed to rear admiral, brigadier general, major general, lieutenant general, 4-star general. It's standard practice. Now, the reason I bring this up, Kevin was associated with the military for many years. Mm-hmm. I give him credit. He served his country very well. But that was certainly, and he even asked me, show me something else where Hillenkoetter described himself as an admiral. another signature where he signed. There is no Hillenkotter signature on the document. So things like that have bothered me over the years, and I once made up a list of 38 false claims that he had made. Fact after fact, or fact, maybe I should say factoid, but whatever it is. Is a factoid by definition a fact that isn't a fact? I don't know.
I don't know.
So I can't explain Kevin. Like I say, he's a very successful writer, and I envy him that. I haven't written any fiction. My name is only on 6 books. People ask me for forwards for their books, which isn't the same thing. But we have been at odds about many aspects of it, and we just seem to have different standards. And, well, there's another thing. He was touting Frank Kaufman as an outstanding witness, and it turns out that Frank didn't witness anything at Roswell. I made all kinds of claims which had no basis in fact, and it was pretty obvious that they didn't. So we have disagreed because we come at the problem differently.
Speaking of this whole topic, Roswell, I would consider that you are the person that basically uncovered this forgotten story. Yes. You know,
I'm the original civilian investigator of the Roswell incident. That's how I put it.
Yes.
I notice I said that carefully. I'm not the original investigator because the government was doing a lot of investigating. They had a real problem on their hands. What the heck is going on here? But, from the public's viewpoint, it was a 2-day story.
Right.
Here today, gone tomorrow.
Yeah.
And it was only when I got involved in the late 70s, and then I had a false start. It's kind of crazy. I was living in California, talked to a ranger, forest ranger, had a great sighting. Those guys are up in the mountains and so forth. And he told me, you really ought to talk to my mom. She had a great sighting in Albuquerque. Okay, so I called his mom, who was Lydia Sleppy. And she worked at a radio station that had a Roswell affiliate. And her station was called by somebody, the guy in Roswell, dictating a story that she was a secretary, basically, not a journalist. And he wanted to put it out on the wire, and the Roswell station wasn't on the newswire. And so he was dictating the story, and then something happened. A bell rang, whatever it was, and there was a transmission. Do not continue this transmission.
Right.
And she said, what should I do? And the guy says, stop. Well, I talked to her. She told me her story. She gave me some names of some people. This is what happened in 47, you understand, and I'm talking to her in about 74. So it's a long time later. And I found some of the people, but I got nowhere. It was a dead end. I mean, I was there, but I don't remember the details, et cetera, et cetera. So, okay, it's sitting in the background. And then, I won't say by accident, I was in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, to give a lecture at Louisiana State University, 1978. And the kids from the university had taken me to the biggest station in town, television station. And I was scheduled to do 3 interviews. I guess they were short of news that day. I don't know. But I did the first 2, and the third reporter was nowhere to be found. And the station manager is looking at his watch. He's giving me coffee, and out of the blue, he said something that was provocative. He said, the guy you really ought to talk to is Jesse Marcel. Brilliant investigator that I am. I said, who's he? He handled wreckage of one of those saucers you're interested in when he was in the military. What? He wasn't making a joke, and there was nobody around. He was clearly being serious. Well, what do you know about him? He lives in Homa. I didn't know where Homa was. I was there later to talk to Jesse, but I followed up. The reporter showed up. I did the interview, was busy the rest of the day. The talk went very well that night. Big crowd. No nasty, noisy negativists giving me a hard time or anything like that. So the next morning from the airport, I called information in Homa. Now, you understand that there are today people who think that the way you find phone numbers is go on the internet.
Yeah.
Well, back then you called information.
Yeah, 411. Yeah.
Yeah, and the nice thing was that oftentimes the person you got lived in the area, and you could say, "Is that a nice part of town?" and things like that. You could learn quite a bit that way. They're knowledgeable. Mm. So anyway, I got a number for Jesse. I explained that I was a nuclear physicist who'd been investigating UFOs at that time for 10 years, and I'd been talking to his name was Alan, the guy at the television station. Oh yeah, he knew him. They were ham radio buddies. And I found out later when I asked Jesse what I asked Bill Allen what Jesse had told him. He hadn't told him anything. When he asked Jesse said, "I can't talk about that." What he had done was seen the article in the newspaper, the New Orleans Times-Picayune, I think it's called, a weird name for a newspaper. But anyway, back then, when you mentioned a GI, you normally put what town, his hometown. So that's how the two made contact and so forth. So he told me a story, and I was very impressed. As a nuclear guy, I mean, here we have the intelligence officer for the only atomic bombing group in the world in 1947. Now, you don't get to be that by being a dink. I mean, they're very important. It's kind of crazy. Once in England, I was on a panel and there was an English astronomer there. Why would an alien go to New Mexico? There's nothing there but sand, he says. And I asked him, well, have you ever been there? Well, no. Then you're not aware that 2 of the 3 nuclear weapons labs in the United States are in New Mexico? That the first atomic bomb was exploded at Trinity site in New Mexico? That White Sands Missile Range is where we fired all our captured German V-2 rockets? No, he doesn't know where any of that. The reason you let off bombs and fire rockets is there aren't many people in New Mexico. There's a lot of land, a lot of sand indeed, but you can't do those things, testing nuclear weapons and so forth, when there are a lot of people around. It's not very convenient. The contrast here to me, I grew up in New Jersey, and now New Jersey it's the most densely populated of all the states. 8 million people in 8,000 square miles. The population density is about 40 times what it is in New Mexico.
Right.
So it's kind of crazy. New Mexico is a special sort of place, and I think that Roswell was a historic event, but it also was a challenge. I mean, this is 2 years after the war, which ended because of an atomic bomb when it was first tested. Incidentally, for people who think, governments wouldn't lie to us, would they? Well, first atomic bomb test, July 16th, I think it was, 1945, was seen from 100 miles away. An awful big explosion. And the sheriffs were getting telephone calls from, what happened? I saw this crazy thing. 5:30 in the morning, you understand, but in New Mexico, it's not uncommon for people to get up early because it gets pretty hot during the day. You got up over 100 in Roswell every day last week. And they put out a lie, a cover story. That sounds much better. An ammunition dump had blown up. Unfortunately, nobody was hurt. 3 weeks later, after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they finally admitted what it was. So government agencies, and I don't blame them for lying. It's like they were very careful not warning the Japanese about dropping a horrible bomb on them because they were afraid they'd move prisoners of war there. Perfectly good reason for not saying, you watch what we do to you. Oh, sure, we'll put our prisoners there. Then drop your bomb. There were serious concerns about these things. So anyway, the question of the meaning is also, a little question. Do these guys mean us harm? What the government didn't know what they wanted. They didn't know where they were from. What they did know is that they had technology. Kenneth Arnold's sighting was June 24th, 1947. Roswell was less than 2 weeks later. And there were about 1,000 sightings we now know in between those two periods of time.
Were there really that many?
Yeah, we didn't know it. Well, even today, you realize that MUFON gets over 500 sighting reports a month. Mm-hmm. And I've had people say, well, I haven't heard anything about any sightings in the last few months. Well, you didn't hear about it, but they were there. Mm-hmm. So it was, the government had to decide, what do we do? And the thing is, okay, they recovered wreckage. That doesn't tell you how the darn thing works, does it? Oh, that's nice-looking equipment. What does it do? What's it made out of? You know, how can we duplicate it, et cetera, et cetera? It's not easy. And certainly, even today, should we put out on the table what we have learned from examination of records at Roswell, at Aztec, and Kecksburg, without the Russians and Chinese putting out what they know? It'd be damn foolish, you know, because we may have learned some things that they haven't learned. We'd like to know what they know. You know? The overwhelming thing about a flying saucer is its potential for military utilization of that technology. Think about it. The military budget on planet Earth this year, $1 trillion. Huh. I mean, you know, it's a sad tale. Look how many kids died of starvation last year, or last month.
Right.
But I'm saying it's clear that military applications are of great significance to governments, and secrecy is of great significance. And don't tell me, I have people tell me, oh, we can, in today's world, with YouTube and the internet, you can't keep secrets. Of course you can. We don't publish classified documents on the internet. I'm not saying there aren't occasional slips by people, but secrets are easy to keep. Need to know an appropriate security level. You put them together, and they scare the hell out of you. I worked under security for 14 years. And one time I was giving a presentation, and my slides weren't ready when they were supposed to be ready, so they made me a special courier to carry these classified slides. And they sat me down and stressed, you know, these slides stay with you, not in the trunk of the car that you're driving, with you. And if we need your itinerary, because if the plane crashes, we're going after the classified material. We don't care about you. Huh. I was glad to get rid of those.
Wow.
But I get people telling me, oh, well, all those guys, the MJ-12 people, would have told their wives what they were doing. No, I never told my wife anything classified. I'd be breaking the rules, and you don't know where the spies are, and I can't control what she says. She wouldn't know it was hurting anybody, you know. So security doesn't work. When you turn on YouTube, you may see a lot of interesting stuff, and some of it may even be true, but you're not seeing classified stuff. And anybody who thinks secrets can't be kept, big ones, the first spy satellite was the Corona spy satellite. Corona is a little town in New Mexico, incidentally. Mm-hmm. Also a Toyota Corona. I drove several of them. But that satellite, we knew that the U-2 had a limited life, the spy plane, you know, because the Russians were getting better, and eventually they did knock one down. The Corona spy satellite, the first 12 launches were done in secret, and were failures.
Wow.
That's a lot of money, 12 spy satellite launches. This is back in the early 60s or late 50s, really.
It's a wonder they didn't give up, really.
Well, they didn't run out of money, apparently. Mm-hmm. Nobody knows what you're spending. The 13th satellite got more data about Soviet military construction. It's pretty hard to know what's going on over there. It's an awfully big country, you know, and so who knows what they're doing. Got more data than all the U-2 flights had preceded it. Do you think we trumpeted, you'll pardon the expression, that great breakthrough? No. That satellite was classified for 30 years. We didn't talk about it. Lockheed developed the stealth aircraft. It costed $10 billion over 10 years in secret. So, and there's a whole bunch more programs. Well, also, one of the myths around is that, research is what's done when you work at a university, in academia, right? Well, sometimes. But when I was working on nuclear airplanes, in 1958, at General Electric, our budget that year was $100 million. We employed 3,400 people, 1,100 of them were engineers and scientists. This wasn't 6 professors and 20 grad students. It was a huge effort. And it was great fun until they canceled the program. I worked on a lot of canceled programs. But what I'm saying is the public doesn't seem to have much recognition of how big these programs can be, how expensive they can be, and frankly, how productive. Look at the Manhattan Project. You know that 5% of all the electricity being produced in the United States in the last 2 years of the war went for separating uranium isotopes, pumping uranium hexafluoride through big sheets of metal with little holes in it, and U-235 goes through a lot faster, so eventually 5% of all the power in the United States went into that.
Amazing.
I mean, that's a lot of dough.
Yes.
And so what I'm saying is we have many examples of projects that went on. I'm not saying they were all sensible or appropriate or whatever. Many programs got canceled because you went for a while. It ain't going to work. Let's stop it. Or somebody else came along with a better story. But it's important to realize that secrets can be kept, and that there's a need for secrecy. If your buddy knows if your enemy knows what you're doing, he's in a much better position to stop you from doing it when the chips are down. And that's warfare. But this planet is doing a lot about warfare. The United States spends more than the next 15 countries together?
Right. Yeah.
Something like that. So obviously is of great significance and importance and so forth. And people ask me, don't you think we are entitled to know everything? No, I don't think that. I think there is a national security aspect, which makes me a strange person to some people. He's for secrecy as appropriate, yes.
Yeah, when it actually comes to security, national security, I totally get that. Going back to Jesse Marcel, there's a question that I've never heard on the message board, and it says that did Jesse Marcel likely lie in interviews with UFO researchers on his background, education, and status as a pilot? Is that anything you've ever heard?
Well, there are people who make wild claims. Let me give you an example. People say he flew, I forget how many miles it was. He didn't say he was flying the airplane. I mean, I'm a big frequent flyer. I've flown, I'm a million miler on Air Canada and Delta. That doesn't mean I flew any of those airplanes. But that's, you see the subtle difference there. Again, I refer to the fact that even though we didn't go to West Point, and Colonel Blanchard, the base commander, did go to West Point, and General Ramey did, Blanchard's boss, and Thomas Jefferson Dubose, who was his adjutant, I spoke with him. It was too late to talk to Blanchard and Ramey. They were dead. I don't know how to cross that barrier. Some people do, but I can't. And so, is that your phone? Or?
Not my phone. Nope. It sounds like in the background, but we'll just continue. That's okay.
Okay. Let me pick that up for just a second.
Sure. Yeah.
Hello. Goodbye.
All right.
Somebody trying to sell me something.
Yeah. Yep. The other line.
Okay. Yeah, I forgot. I got two phones here, and I don't have one to each ear. I've heard of people doing that, but I am not able to do that.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is, I'm one of the few researchers who actually, I was in Jesse's home in beautiful down in Houma, Louisiana. I was in his son's home. Jesse Jr. was a medical doctor, died a couple of years back. Was a flight surgeon. served. Would you believe he was called back in at age 68?
Wow.
He served as a helicopter pilot in the Middle East.
Amazing.
Great guy.
Yeah.
I was in his home in Montana. Greatest respect for both of them.
Mm-hmm.
But my point is, people have leveled all kinds of accusations at everybody involved with all of this. I mean, one guy called Colonel Blanchard, he was a loose cannon. He was a big guy, Blanchard. But as indication that that's a hasty judgment, he got 4 more promotions, was a 4-star general and vice chief of staff of the Air Force when he died of a massive heart attack at the Pentagon in the mid-60s.
Mm-hmm.
Now, each one of those promotions had to be approved by Congress. And along the way, he oversaw the Air Corps guys with the nuclear weapons. Thousands of nuclear weapons under his control. We're supposed to believe that the government is so incompetent that they picked a loose cannon do a job like that. I don't believe it for a minute. I did talk to Blanchard's daughter and 2 sons, incidentally, but so I mean, that's the kind of thing that you hear. It sounds great. Oh, he was just a loose cannon. Really? You know? The evidence doesn't indicate that. And there have been charges made about many of the people involved, because it's easier to do that than to do your research. You know, I get people who never talk to any of the key people, but they know what the truth is, and who don't. I've been to 20 archives, and you know, the classic example of that, Mr. Philip J. Klass, senior avionics editor for Aviation Week and Space Technology. He said every sighting has a prosaic explanation. Now, one of the MJ-12 documents, just a paragraph memo from Bobby Cutler, who was Ike's national security advisor, to General Nathan Twining, who was a member of MJ-12. And Phil Klass says, well, obviously you didn't notice that document's done in the large pica type, but the National Security Council, says NSC at the top, used only elite type. And I got 9 samples to prove it, and he says to me in a letter, making much noise about it, I challenge you to find any other genuine documents done in the same size and style type, and I'll give you $100 each up to a maximum of 10 documents. And I looked at my files. I found 20 pica type documents very quickly, but they didn't meet all his criteria. He had a list of things that had to be true. But I was going to the Truman Library, so I dug things out, or to the Eisenhower Library. Sorry, I go to both on the same trip normally, and I found 14 that met all his criteria. Sent him copies and an invoice for $1,000, and he paid me.
Right.
And he got madder than heck when I included a copy of his check to me in a book. He was going to sue me and all that stuff. And I wrote him, Phil, you sent me a check. I Xeroxed it. The bank cashed the check. I can do whatever I darn please with the Xerox. And he shut up. But here's the kicker. I didn't know it until after this. He had never been to the Eisenhower Library. I spent weeks there. I mean, that's typical of the intellectual bankruptcy of the pseudoscience of anti-ufology. And it means you have to watch out. And my latest book with Kathleen Marden, Fact, Fiction, and Flying Saucers, we explore especially 3 people, Dr. Edward U. Condon, great physicist who headed the Condon study at the University of Colorado, and Dr. Donald Menzel, and Phil Klass. I'm trying to figure out, why did these people say the dumb things they did? Condon, look, I'm a physicist. He was president of the American Physical Society, had an enviable record. And yet he was ridiculous enough to say, we can be sure that there won't be alien visitations for at least 10,000 years. You know, who can look 10,000 years into the future? Who can look 100 years into the future, you know?
And why
now,
would just on that matter, why would that make a difference anyway? Because, you know, the way you know, a species would evolve on different planets is anyone's guess.
You're right about that. And I don't do any guessing on that.
Yeah, it's
well,
crazy.
you know, with Menzel, at least I found the reason. Here we have a Harvard University professor, chairman of the astronomy department at Harvard. Now, it's pretty darn clear you don't need a security clearance to head the astronomy department. So he wrote 3 anti-UFO books. He preceded Class as the leading skeptic, or debunker is a much better word. A skeptic says, I don't know. A debunker says, oh, I know, there's nothing to that. Anyway, it's a long story, which is in my books, but I won't, it's such as Top Secret Magic, all about Majestico. But the reason for him, I found out, much to my surprise, was that it turns out, I found a letter from him to President Kennedy. Dear Jack, they knew each other quite well. And he said, there's one area, this is after Jack's election, he'd been on the board of overseers of Harvard, and his area of interest was astronomy. And that's how he dealt with, got to know Menzel. This is before he was president. And he would even have breakfast together. And I found, I had to get permission from 3 different people to look at his papers. I saw a letter from an attorney to another member of MJ-12, thanking him for all his help in getting Don Menzel off on the charges of disloyalty. I mean, after all, he led an eclipse expedition to Russia in the mid-30s. Obviously, he's not a faithful American. What nonsense. Anyway, I wound up going to the Harvard archives after getting permission from 3 people, and there's a letter from Menzel to Kennedy saying, there's one area I may be of assistance to you. It's with regard to the huge national security agency, the NSA. When we are properly cleared to each other, I can tell you more. I've been associated with them for 30 years. What? You know? And it turns out he did work for the CIA. He did all kinds of classified work that nobody knew about. And I say nobody knew about it because there are 2 special issues of Sky and Telescope dedicated to Donald Menzel. The first was at the point of his death, and the second was at the 100th anniversary of his birth. Neither one said anything about his post-World War II work for the government that was so highly classified. So I didn't like the man while he was alive. I had one run-in with him. I was speaking at Harvard that evening, and I called to invite him to my lecture because it was to an engineering alumni association. I had no idea how much publicity they had done, you know, other than to their members. So I called him, gave him my name. Oh, I know all about you, he said. And I said, oh, you read my congressional testimony next to yours? No, you can't be a scientist and believe in flying saucers. I laughed, of course. He got angry. Dr. Menzel, I didn't call to argue with you. I called out of courtesy. I'm speaking on your campus. I'm speaking at 8 o'clock in such and such hall, and I'd be happy to have you there. Oh, well, of course I won't be there. So I told the story that night, you know. And then, so I was not an admirer of Donald Menzel. But once I found out all his classified activities, this was after his death. Nobody knew about him during his life. I developed an appreciation for. I could understand him. In other words, when you serve in your country, you do what you're supposed to do. And Kevin Randall mentioned that I hadn't found anything that mentioned MJ-12 in his papers. Of course not. A man who had all those years of work with classified material is going to leave stuff lying around? Classified material belongs in a special safe. A combination safe that's fire resistant. You know, there's a whole bunch of rules and so forth. And I did talk to Menzel's secretary, and he was very security conscious. But, you know, that's a terrible... Yes, it is true. I did not find anything in writing from Menzel that said, yeah, I'm a proud member of MJ-12 or anything like that, you know. But I certainly wouldn't have expected to.
Right.
And so that leaves Phil Klass, and we don't know who he was working for, but I'd say somebody. He used to say that nobody can show that I work for a 3-letter agency, you know, CIA, NSA. What if it had 4 letters?
He got around that.
And if there's anybody listening I'd be happy to hear of any knowledge that they have of Phil Klass, who was another one who was an excellent writer. No question about that. He just didn't get his facts straight about UFOs.
Yeah.
Standard practice, I guess.
He seemed very angry about the topic.
You know, you're right, and I don't fully understand that. He even complained about people suggesting that somebody was lying. You have to lie to protect security, darn it. You tiptoe. The way I put it is, sometimes you have to tiptoe around the truth. Okay? You know, hey, it's a massive effort keeping secrets.
I got a question here from the forum, and it's sort of a little bit of the conspiracy angle here about the government and cover-ups. Do you believe the government is capable of something as drastic to the extent of killing any potential whistleblowers in order to keep the ET secrecy?
Well,
I know they threatened it, or there's alleged threats.
I found one guy that had worked at the White House, and he very quietly said that, what's the term, there's a term that indicates wet jobs. That he knew of a case, and he hated to admit it, but he knew of a case in which somebody was taken out because he'd been sloppy about security. All I can tell you is repeat that as a secondhand story, but yeah, I think so. There are times, you know, you have to weigh consequences. If I do and if I don't. If your enemy finds out what you're doing soon enough to stop you from doing it, that may mean a terrible thing. You know, and so I'm not saying they're evil. I'm saying there are rules of the game, and sometimes you have to do things which aren't very pleasant, including taking out your own people.
Now, getting back to Jesse Marcel and you interviewing him and all of that, what do you think Roswell would be if Jesse Marcel didn't live long enough or never said anything? Do you think eventually it would have been exposed?
That's a very good question, and I haven't thought about it a lot, but on the one hand, my pride says, oh, nobody else could have gotten that by being in the right place at the right time, you know. On the other hand, it wouldn't surprise me if somebody else had come forward on their dying days. You know what I mean? An act of conscience. There are people who get fed up with the government, you know, who think that maybe their grandchild is entitled to know something like that. Because there isn't, can you think of anything more significant than recognition that there are other beings out there in our neighborhood? That's a very big story. So I can't say it wouldn't have come out. But when I look at how fortunate the circumstances were, I mean, I don't think it was ever in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and certainly not with the guy who happened to know Jesse.
Yeah, the odds of all that happening the way it did, very slim.
Yeah, and I'm glad it happened. I feel very fortunate. I feel honored. There is a DVD out now, Recollections of Roswell, that has testimony from 23 first-hand witnesses who are all dead now, except one. He's an old man. A very old man, as you can imagine. But and it includes testimony of Jesse. So for people who think that, it's all lost in history, they can actually listen to first-hand testimony from people who were involved. And, you know, I will be the first to admit that sometimes investigators get lucky. After talking to Jesse, I checked editor and publisher, which is a listing of all the newspapers and magazines in the country, and I went to the library, did my homework, and I looked up Roswell. I didn't know anything about Roswell, New Mexico. They have a newspaper. I had two, actually. Roswell Daily Record. So I called the newspaper, asked for the editor from 1947. This is in 1978. And, oh, he's long gone. What do you need? Well, I've got some articles here. Bill Moore and I had dug out some articles, looking up Roswell and stuff. And it says that the base public information officer, I didn't even know the base had been closed in the mid-60s. That's another story. Guy named Walter Howe taught, because his name is spelled 4 different ways in the newspaper articles. And before I could finish the sentence, the person on the other end says, "Oh, his wife works here." What? Total. Walter was the public information officer. He was also, a fact never mentioned by the noisy negativists, a World War II bombardier with more than 20 missions over Japan. He also was chosen to drop the instrument package when they exploded an A-bomb in 1946 at Operation Crossroads. You pick your best guy to do that because you don't have many atom bombs to waste back at that time. Mm-hmm. And without the instrument, what good was the test, So sometimes you get lucky is what I'm saying. Walter, I talked to the wife, and Walter's gone, so is his wife. But he had a base yearbook, and have a copy of it. So it was a great help in finding people. Because you find one guy and they mention other people and you dig out their names. It's a lot of work, but because we didn't have an internet back then. But like I say, you got to take advantage of the lucky times when you stumble on something and follow up on it.
That's it for the show this evening. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back with Sweden's own Claes Svahn to be talking about Swedish UFOs next week. Remember to keep your eyes to the sky, and thanks for listening.